Chapter 23, The Badlands. Gramps said, "How's your snake leg, Gooseberry?" I could tell he was worried about Gram, but less about her leg than her breathing, which was still raspy. "We'll stop in the Badlands, okay, Gooseberry?" Gram merely nodded. She didn't even scold him for calling her a gooseberry. The closer we got to the Badlands, the more wicked were the whispers in the air. "Slow down. Slow, slow, slow." "Maybe we shouldn't go to the Badlands," I suggested. "What? Not go? Of course we should go," Gramps said. "We're almost there. It's a national treasure." All along the road into the Badlands were signs for Wall Drug, a famous drugstore in Wall, South Dakota. "Don't miss spectacular world-famous Wall Drug." And a little further on, 70 miles to Wall Drug. And 10 miles later, 60 miles to Wall Drug. "What is this gall-dang Wall Drug?" Gramps asked. "I'd sure like to know what is so gall-dang spectacular about a drugstore." My mother must have traveled on this road and seen those same signs. What was she thinking about when she saw that sign? Or that one, when she reached this spot in the road? My mother did not drive. She was terrified of cars. "I don't like all that speed," she said. "I like to be in control of where I am going and how fast I am going." When she said she was going all the way to Lewiston, Idaho, my father and I were astonished. "How are you going to get there?" my father asked. "On a bus." "A bus all the way across the country?" "Yes," she said. "You still won't be in control of where you are going or how fast you are going." "I know it," she said. "I'm going to make myself do this, and when I come back, I'm going to learn how to drive." I could not imagine why she had chosen Idaho. I thought perhaps she had opened an atlas, pointed a finger at any old spot. But later, I learned that she had a cousin in Lewiston, Idaho. I haven't seen her for 15 years, my mother said, and that's good because she will tell me what I am really like. "I could tell you that, sugar," my father said. "No, I mean before I was a wife and a mother. I mean underneath, where I am Chanhassen." After driving for so long through the hot South Dakota prairie, it was a shock to come upon the Badlands. I could not quite believe that it was actually there. I thought I might be having hallucinations. It was as if someone had ironed out all the rest of South Dakota and smushed all the hills and valleys and rocks into this spot. Right smack in the middle of hot plains were jagged peaks and steep gorges. Above was a high blue sky, and below were the pink and purple and black rocks. You could stand right on the edge of the gorges and see down into the most treacherous ravines, lined with sharp, rough outcroppings. You expect to see human skeletons dangling here and there. It was odd seeing all those brilliant colors, and on such harsh rocks, I could picture someone coming along with a gigantic paintbrush and having a gay old time. Golly, these rocks are so terrifying. I ought to beautify them some. Maybe I'll put some purple here and some pink over there, and oh yes, a whole bucket of lavender down there. Gram tried to say huzzah, huzzah, but she could not breathe well. Hut, she rasped. Gramps placed a blanket on the ground so that she could sit and look. My mother sent 2 postcards from the Badlands. One of them said, "Salamanca is my left arm. I miss my left arm." I told Gram and Gramps a story which my mother had told me about the high sky, which looked higher than anywhere else I had ever been. Long ago, when there were only Native American Indian persons living here, the sky was so low that you might bump your head on it if you were not careful, and so low that people sometimes disappeared right up into it. The Indians got a little fed up with this, so they made long poles, and one day they all raised their poles and pushed. They pushed the sky as high as they could. "And look ye there," Gramps said. "They pushed so good, the sky stayed put." While I was telling this story, a pregnant woman stood nearby, dabbing at her face with a handkerchief. "That woman looks world-weary," Gramps said. He asked her if she would like to rest on our blanket. "I'll go look around," I said. Pregnant women frightened me. When my mother first told me she was pregnant, she added, "At last, we are really going to fill this house up with children." At first, I didn't like the idea. What was wrong with having just me? My mother, father, and I were our own little unit. As the baby grew inside her, my mother let me listen to its heartbeat and feel it kicking against her, and I started looking forward to seeing this baby. I hoped it would be a girl, and I would have a sister. Together, my father, my mother, and I decorated the nursery. We painted it sparkling white and hung yellow curtains. My father stripped an old dresser and repainted it. People began giving us the tiniest baby clothes. We washed and folded each shirt, jumpsuit, and sleeper. We bought fresh new cloth diapers because my mother liked to see diapers hanging outside on the line. The one thing we could not do was settle on a name. Nothing seemed quite right. Nothing was perfect enough for this baby. My father seemed more worried about this than my mother. Something will come to us, my mother said. The perfect name will arrive in the air one day. 3 weeks before the baby was due, I was out in the woods beyond the farthest field. My father was in town on errands. My mother was scrubbing the doors. She said that scrubbing the doors made her feel better. My father did not like doing this, but she insisted. That did not like her doing this, but she insisted. My mother was not a fragile, sickly woman. It was normal for her to do this sort of thing. In the woods, I climbed an oak, singing my mother's song. Oh, don't fall in love with a sailor boy, a sailor boy, a sailor boy. I climbed higher and higher. Don't fall in love with a sailor boy, 'cause the branch I was on, the branch in which I had stepped, snapped, and the one at which I grasped was dead and came away in my hands. I fell down, down, as if I were in slow motion. I saw leaves. I knew I was falling. When I came to, I was on the ground with my face pressed into the dirt. My right leg was twisted beneath me. When I tried to move, it felt as if sharp needles were shooting all up and down my leg. I tried to drag myself across the ground, but the needles shot up into my brain and made everything black. There was a walloping, buzzing in my head. I must have passed out again, because the next time I opened my eyes, the woods were darker and the air was cooler. I heard my mother calling. Her voice was distant and faint, coming. I thought from near the barn. I answered, but my voice was caught in my chest. I came to in my own bed. My mother had found me and had carried me back through the woods, across the fields and down the long hill to the house. My leg was in a cast. The baby came that night. I heard my father telephoning the doctor. She won't make it, he said. It's happening now, right now. I hobbled out of bed. My mother was sunk into a pillow, sweating and groaning. Something's wrong, she said to my father. Something's wrong. She saw me standing there and said, you shouldn't watch. I don't think I'm very good at this. In the hallway, outside her room, I lowered myself to the floor. The doctor came. My mother screamed just once, one long, mournful wail, and then it was quiet. When the doctor carried the baby out of the room, I asked to see it. It had a pale bluish tinge, and there were marks on its neck where the umbilical cord had strangled it. It might have been dead for hours, the doctor told my father. I just can't say exactly. Was it a boy or a girl? I asked. The doctor whispered his answer, a girl. I asked if I could touch her. She was still a little warm from being inside my mother. She looked so sweet and peaceful, all curled up, and I wanted to hold her, but the doctor said it was not a good idea. I thought maybe if I had held her, she would wake up. My father looked quite shaken, but he didn't seem concerned about the baby anymore. He kept going in and touching my mother. He said to me, it wasn't your fault, Sal. It wasn't because she carried you. You mustn't think that. I did not believe him. I went into my mother's room and crawled up on the bed beside her. She was staring at the ceiling. Let me hold it, she said. Hold what? The baby, she said. Her voice was odd and silly. My father came in, and she asked him for the baby. He leaned down and said, I wish. The baby, she said. It didn't make it. I'll hold the baby, she said. It didn't make it. It can't be dead, she said in that same sing-song voice. It was just alive a minute ago. I slept beside her until I heard her calling my father. When he turned on the light, I saw the blood spread across all the bed. It had soaked the sheets and the blanket. It had soaked into the white plaster of my cast. An ambulance came and took her and my father away. Gram and Gramps came to stay with me. Gram took all the sheets and boiled them. She scrubbed the blood from my cast as best she could, but a dark pink stain remained. My father came home from the hospital briefly the next day. We should name the baby anyway, he said. Do you have any suggestions? The name came to me from the air. Tulip, I said. Let's name her Tulip. My father smiled. Your mother will like that. We'll bury the baby in the little cemetery near the aspen grove, where the tulips come up every spring. My mother had 2 operations in the next 2 days. She wouldn't stop bleeding. Later, she said, they took out all of my equipment. My mother would not have any more babies. I sat on the edge of the gorge in the Badlands, looking back at Graham and Gramps and the pregnant woman on the blanket. I pretended for just a moment that it was my mother sitting there, and she would still have the baby, and everything would be the way it was supposed to be. And then I tried to imagine my mother sitting here on her trip to Lewiston, Idaho. Did all the people on the bus get out and walk around with her, or did she sit by herself like I was doing? Did she sit right here in this spot, and did she see that exact pink spire? Was she thinking about me? I picked up a flat stone and sailed it across the gorge, where it hit far on the wall and plummeted down, careening off jagged outcroppings. My mother once told me the Blackfoot story of Napi, the old man who created men and women. To decide if these new people should live forever or die, Napi selected a piece of bark and said that he would drop it in the river, and if it floated, people would live forever. If it sank, they would die. The bark floated. A woman said, try it with a stone. If the stone floats, we will all live forever. If it sinks, we will die. Napi dropped a stone in the water. It sank. People die. Why didn't Napi stick with the bark? I asked. Why did he listen to that woman? My mother shrugged. If you had been there, you could have made the rock float, she said. She was referring to my habit of skipping stones across the water. I picked up another rock and sailed it across the gorge, and this one, too, hit the opposite wall and fell down and down and down. It was not a river. It was a hole. What did I expect?